Early Islamic philosophy. Classical Islamic philosophy is a period of intense philosophical development beginning in the 2nd century of the Islamic calendar and lasting until the 6th century. The period is known as the Islamic Golden Age, and the achievements of this period had a crucial influence in the development of modern philosophy and science. For Renaissance Europe, the influence represented one of the largest technology transfers in world history. This period starts with al-Kindi in the 9th century and ends with Averroes at the end of 12th century. The death of Averroes effectively marks the end of a particular discipline of Islamic philosophy usually called the Peripatetic Arabic School, and philosophical activity declined significantly in Western Islamic countries, namely in Islamic Spain and North Africa, though it persisted for much longer in the Eastern countries, in particular Persia and India, where several schools of philosophy continued to flourish: Avicennism, Illuminationist philosophy, mystical philosophy, and Transcendent theosophy. Some of the significant achievements of early Muslim philosophers included the development of a strict science of citation, the isnad or backing, the development of a method of open inquiry to disprove claims, the ijtihad, which could be generally applied to many types of questions, the willingness to both accept and challenge authority within the same process, recognition that science and philosophy are both subordinate to morality, and that moral choices are prior to any investigation are concerned with either the separation of theology and law during the early Abbasid period, a precursor to secularism, the distinction between religion and philosophy, marking the beginning of secular thought, the beginning of a peer review process, early ideas on evolution, the beginnings of the scientific method, are an important contribution to the philosophy of science, the introduction of temporal modal logic and inductive logic, the beginning of social philosophy, including the formulation of theories on social cohesion and social conflict, the beginning of the philosophy of history, the development of the philosophical novel and the concepts of empiricism and tabula rasa, and distinguishing between essence and existence. Saadia Gaon, David Ben Merwan al-Muqamis, Maimonides, and Thomas Aquinas were influenced by the Mutazilite work, particularly Avicennism and Averroism, and the Renaissance and the use of empirical methods were inspired at least in part by Arabic translations of Greek, Jewish, Persian and Egyptian works translated into Latin during the Renaissance of the 12th century, and taken during the Reconquista in 1492. Early Islamic philosophy can be divided into clear sets of influences, branches, schools, and fields, as described below. Origin: Muhammad. The life of Muhammad, a sira which generated both the Quran and Hadith, during which philosophy was defined by Muslims as consisting in acceptance or rejection of his message. Together the sira and Hadith constitute the sunnah and are validated by isnad to determine the likely truth of the report of any given saying of Muhammad. Key figures are Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, al-Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Abu Dawood and al-Nasa'i, each sifted through literally millions of hadiths to accept a list of under one. This work, which was not completed until the 10th century, began shortly after the farewell sermon in 631. Branches: Kalam ilm al-Kalam is the Islamic philosophical discipline of seeking theological principles through dialectic. Kalam in Islamic practice relates to the discipline of seeking theological knowledge through debate and argument. A scholar of Kalam is referred to as a mutakallim. With Kalam, questions about the Sira and Hadith, as well as science and law, began to be investigated beyond the scope of Muhammad's beliefs. This period is characterized by emergence of ijtihad, and the first fiqh, the Sunnah, became published and accepted. Philosophy separate from Muslim theology was discouraged due to a lack of participants. During this period, traditions similar to Socratic method began to evolve, but philosophy remained subordinate to religion. Independent minds exploiting the methods of ijtihad sought to investigate the doctrines of the Quran, which until then had been accepted in faith on the authority of divine revelation. One of the first debates was that between partisans of the Qadar, who affirmed free will, and the Jabarites, who maintained the belief in fatalism. At the 2nd century of the Hijra, a new movement arose in the theological school of Basra, Iraq. A pupil, Wasil ibn Ata, who was expelled from the school of Hassan of Basra because his answers were contrary to then orthodox Islamic tradition, and became leader of a new school, and systematized the radical opinions of preceding sects, particularly those of the Qadarites. This new school was called Mutazilite, that lasted from the 8th to 10th centuries. Its principal dogmas were three. God is an absolute unity, and no attribute can be ascribed to him. Man is a free agent. It is on account of these two principles that the Mutazilites designate themselves the partisans of justice and unity. All knowledge necessary for the salvation of man emanates from his reason. Humans could acquire knowledge before, as well as after, revelation, by the sole light of reason. This fact makes knowledge obligatory upon all men, at all times, and in all places. The Mutazilites, compelled to defend the principles against the orthodox Islam of their day, looked for support in philosophy, and are one of the first to pursue a rational theology called Ilm al-Kalam. Those professing it were called Mutakallimun. This appellation became the common name for all seeking philosophical demonstration in confirmation of religious principles. The first Mutakallimun had to debate both the Orthodox and the non-Muslims, and they may be described as occupying the middle ground between those two parties. But subsequent generations were to large extent critical towards the Mutazilite school, especially after formation of the Asharite concepts. Throughout history, the place of Kalam in Islamic thought has been controversial. The vast majority of the early traditional Sunni Muslim scholars have either criticized or prohibited it. Jewish and Muslim peripatetics, generally, stopped short in the respective Aristotelianism whenever there was danger of wounding orthodox religion. Falsafa. For the 9th century onward, owing to Caliph al-Ma'mun and his successor, Greek philosophy was introduced among the Arabs, and the Peripatetic school began to find able representatives among them. Such were al-Kindi, al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ebone Rushdie, all of whose fundamental principles were considered as criticized by the Mutakallimun. Another trend, represented by the Brethren of Purity, used Aristotelian language to expound a fundamentally Neoplatonic and Neo-Pythagorean worldview. During the Abbasid Caliphate, a number of thinkers and scientists, some of them heterodox Muslims and non-Muslims, played a role in transmitting Greek, Hindus, and other pre-Islamic knowledge to the Christian West. They contributed to making Aristotle known in Christian Europe. Three speculative thinkers, al-Farabi, Ibn Sina and al-Kindi, combined Aristotelianism and Neoplatonism with other ideas introduced through Islam. They were considered by many as highly unorthodox, and a few even described them as non-Islamic philosophers. From Spain, Arabic philosophic literature was translated into Hebrew and Latin, contributing to the development of modern European philosophy. The philosophers Moses Maimonides and Ibn Khaldun, the father of sociology and historiography, were also important philosophers, though the latter did not identify himself as a falsafa, but rather a kalam author. Some differences between kalam and falsafa. Aristotle attempted to demonstrate the unity of God, but from the view which he maintained, that matter was eternal, it followed that God could not be the creator of the world. To assert that God's knowledge extends only to the general laws of the universe, and not to individual and accidental things, is tantamount to denying prophecy. One other part of Aristotle's theory shocked the faith of the Mutakallimun, the Aristotelian theory of the soul. According to Aristotelianism, the human soul is simply man's substantial form, the set of properties that make matter into a living human body. This seems to imply that the human soul cannot exist apart from the body. Indeed, Aristotle writes, it is clear that the soul, or at least some parts of it, cannot be separated from the body, and thus, those have the right idea who think that the soul does not exist without the body. Quote, in Aristotelianism, at least one psychological force, the active intellect, can exist apart from the body. However, according to many interpretations, the active intellect is a superhuman entity emanating from God and enlightening the human mind, not a part of any individual human soul. Thus, Aristotle's theories seem to deny the immortality of the individual human soul. Wherefore the Mutakallimun had, before anything else, to establish a system of philosophy to demonstrate the creation of matter, and they adopted to that end the theory of atoms as enunciated by Democritus. They taught that atoms possess neither quantity nor extension. Originally atoms were created by God, and are created now as occasion seems to require. Bodies come into existence or die, through the aggregation of the sunderance of these atoms. But this theory did not remove the objections of philosophy to a creation of matter. For, indeed, if it be supposed that God commenced his work at a certain definite time by his will, and for a certain definite object, it must be admitted that he was imperfect before accomplishing his will, or before attaining his object. In order to obviate this difficulty, the Mutakallimun extended the theory of the atoms to time, and claimed that just as space is constituted of atoms and vacuum, time, likewise, is constituted of small indivisible moments. The creation of the world once established, it was an easy matter for them to demonstrate the existence of a creator, and that God is unique, omnipotent, and omniscient. Main protagonists of falsafa and the critics. The 12th century saw the apotheosis of pure philosophy and the decline of the kalam, which later, being attacked by both the philosophers and the orthodox, perished for lack of champions. This supreme exaltation of philosophy may be attributed, in great measure, to al-Ghazali among the Persians, and to Judah ha-Levi among the Jews. It can be argued that the attacks directed against the philosophers by al-Ghazali in his work, Tahafut al-Falasifa, not only produced, by reaction, a current favorable to philosophy, but induced the philosophers themselves to profit by his criticism. They thereafter made the theories clearer and the logic closer. The influence of this reaction brought forth the two greatest philosophers that the Islamic Peripatetic School ever produced, namely, Ibn Bajjah and Ebone Rushdie, both of whom undertook the defense of philosophy. Since no idea and no literary or philosophical movement ever germinated on Persian or Arabian soil without leaving its impress on the Jews, the Persian Ghazali found an imitator in the person of Judah ha-Levi. This poet also took upon himself to free his religion from what he saw as the shackles of speculative philosophy, and to this end read the Ghazali, in which he sought to discredit all schools of philosophy alike. He passes severe censure upon the Mutakallimun for seeking to support religion by philosophy. He says, I consider him to have attained the highest degree of perfection who is convinced of religious truths without having scrutinized them and reasoned over them. Then he reduced the chief propositions of the Mutakallimun, to prove the unity of God, to 10 in number, describing them at length, and concluding in these terms: does the Kalam give us more information concerning God and his attributes than the Prophet did? Aristotelianism finds no favor in Judah ha-Levi's eyes, for it is no less given to details and criticism. Neoplatonism alone suited him somewhat, owing to its appeal to his poetic temperament. Ebone Rushdie, the contemporary of Maimonides, closed the first great philosophical era of the Muslims. He was a defender of Aristotelian philosophy against Ash'ari theologians led by al-Ghazali. Averroes' philosophy was considered controversial in Muslim circles. The theories of Ibn Rushdie do not differ fundamentally from those of Ibn Bajjah and Ibn Tufayl, who only follow the teachings of Ibn Sina and al-Farabi. Like all Islamic peripatetics, Ebone Rushdie admits the hypothesis of the intelligence of the spheres and the hypothesis of universal emanation, through which motion is communicated from place to all parts of the universe as far as the supreme world. Hypotheses which, in the mind of the Arabic philosophers, did away with the dualism involved in Aristotle's doctrine of pure energy and eternal matter. His ideas on the separation of philosophy and religion, further developed by the Averroist school of philosophy, were later influential in the development of modern secularism. But while al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and other Persian and Muslim philosophers hurried, so to speak, over subjects that trenched on religious dogmas, Ebone Rushdie delighted in dwelling upon them with full particularity and stress. Thus he says, not only is matter eternal, but form is potentially inherent in matter, otherwise it were a creation ex nihilo. According to this theory, therefore, the existence of this world is not only a possibility, as Ibn Sina declared, in order to make concessions to the orthodox, but also a necessity. Driven from the Islamic schools, Islamic philosophy found a refuge with the Jews, to whom belongs the honor of having transmitted it to the Christian world. A series of eminent men, such as the Ibn Tibbons, Narboni, Gersonides, joined in translating the Arabic philosophical works into Hebrew and commenting upon them. The works of Ibn Rushdie especially became the subject of their study, due in great measure to Maimonides, who, in a letter addressed to his pupil Joseph ben Judah, spoke in the highest terms of Ibn Rushd's commentary. It should be mentioned that this depiction of intellectual tradition in Islamic lands is mainly dependent upon what West could understand from this long era. In contrast, there are some historians and philosophers who do not agree with this account and describe this era in a completely different way. The main point of dispute is on the influence of different philosophers on Islamic philosophy, especially the comparative importance of Eastern intellectuals such as Ibn Sina and of Western thinkers such as Ibn Rushdie. Judeo-Islamic philosophy. The oldest Jewish religio-philosophical work preserved is that of Saadia Gaon, Munovedeot, the Book of Beliefs and Opinions. In this work Saadia treats the questions that interested the Mutakallimin, such as the creation of matter, the unity of God, the divine attributes, the soul, etc. Saadia criticizes other philosophers severely. For Saadia there was no problem as to creation. God created the world ex nihilo, just as the Bible attests, and he contests the theory of the Mutakallimin in reference to atoms, which theory, he declares, is just as contrary to reason and religion as the theory of the philosophers professing the eternity of matter. To prove the unity of God, Saadia uses the demonstrations of the Mutakallimin. Only the attributes of essence can be ascribed to God, but not the attributes of action. The soul is a substance more delicate even than that of the celestial spheres. Here Saadia controverts the Mutakallimin, who considered the soul an accident arad, and employs the following one of the premises to justify his position: only a substance can be the substratum of an accident. Saadia argues, if the soul be an accident only, it can itself have no such accidents as wisdom, joy, love, etc. Saadia was thus in every way a supporter of the Kalam, and if at times he deviated from its doctrines, it was owing to his religious views, just as the Jewish and Muslim peripatetics stopped short in the respective Aristotelianism whenever there was danger of wounding orthodox religion. Schools. Arabism. Al-Farabi was a founder of his own school of Islamic philosophy, but which was later overshadowed by Avicennism. Al-Farabi's school of philosophy breaks with the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, moves from metaphysics to methodology, a move that anticipates modernity, and, at the level of philosophy, Al-Farabi unites theory and practice in the sphere of the political. He liberates practice from theory. His Neoplatonic theology is also more than just metaphysics as rhetoric. In his attempt to think through the nature of a firskos, Al-Farabi discovers the limits of human knowledge. Al-Farabi had great influence on science and philosophy for several centuries, and was widely considered second only to Aristotle in knowledge in his time. His work, aimed at synthesis of philosophy and Sufism, paved the way for the work of Ibn Sina. Avicennism. Due to Avicenna's successful reconciliation between Aristotelianism and Neoplatonism along with Kalam, Avicennism eventually became the leading school of Islamic philosophy by the 12th century. Avicenna had become a central authority on philosophy by then, and several scholars in the 12th century commented on his strong influence at the time. People nowadays that truth is whatever says that it is inconceivable for him to err, and that whoever contradicts him in anything he says cannot be rational. Avicennism was also influential in medieval Europe, particularly his doctrines on the nature of the soul and his existence-essence distinction, along with the debates and censure that they raised in scholastic Europe. This was particularly the case in Paris, where Avicennism was later proscribed in 1210. Nevertheless, his psychology and theory of knowledge influenced William of Auvergne and Albertus Magnus, and his metaphysics influenced the thought of Thomas Aquinas. Averroism. Averroes is most famous for his commentaries on Aristotle's works and for writing the incoherence of the incoherence, in which he defended the fallacy for against Al-Ghazali's The Incoherence of the Philosophers. While he had very little influence in the Islamic world, which was then dominated by Avicennian philosophy and Ash'ari theology, Averroism became very influential in medieval Europe, especially among the scholastics. Averroism eventually led to the development of modern secularism, for which Ebone Rushdie is considered as the founding father of secular thought in Western Europe. The concept of existence precedes essence, a key foundational concept of existentialism, can also be found in the works of Averroes, as a reaction to Avicenna's concept of essence precedes existence. Ethics. Environmental philosophy. Perhaps due to resource scarcity in most Islamic nations, there was an emphasis on limited use of natural capital, i.e., producing land. Traditions of Haram and Hema and early urban planning were expressions of strong social obligations to stay within carrying capacity and to preserve the natural environment as an obligation of Khalifa or stewardship. Muhammad is considered a pioneer of environmentalism for his teachings on environmental preservation. His hadiths on agriculture and environmental philosophy were compiled in the Book of Agriculture of the Sahih Bukhari, which included the following saying: "There is none amongst the believers who plants a tree, or sows a seed, and then a bird, or a person, or an animal eats thereof, but it is regarded as having given a charitable gift." Several such statements concerning the environment are also found in the Quran, such as the following: "And there is no animal in the earth nor bird that flies with its two wings, but that their community is like yourselves. The earliest known treatises dealing with environmentalism and environmental science, especially pollution, were Arabic medical treatises written by al-Kindi, Custer, Ibn Luqa, al-Razi, Ibn al-Jazar, al-Tamimi, al-Masihi, Avicenna, Ali ibn Ridwan, Ibn Jumay, Isaac Israeli ben Solomon, Abd al-Latif, Ibn al-Kuf, and Ibn al-Nafis. The works covered a number of subjects related to pollution such as air pollution, water pollution, soil contamination, municipal solid waste mishandling, and environmental impact assessments of certain localities. Córdoba, Al-Andalus also had the first waste containers and waste disposal facilities for litter collection. Medical ethics. The ethical standards of Muslim physicians was first laid down in the 9th century by Ishaq bin Ali Rahawi, who wrote the Adab al-Tabib, the first treatise dedicated to medical ethics. He regarded physicians as guardians of souls and bodies, and wrote 20 chapters on various topics related to medical ethics, including what the physician must avoid and beware of, the manners of visitors, the care of remedies by the physician, the dignity of the medical profession, the examination of physicians, the removal of corruption among physicians. Humanism. Many medieval Muslim thinkers pursued humanistic, rational and scientific discourses in the search for knowledge, meaning and values. A wide range of Islamic writings on love, poetry, history and philosophical theology show that medieval Islamic thought was open to the humanistic ideas of individualism, occasional secularism, skepticism and liberalism. Another reason the Islamic world flourished during the Middle Ages was an early emphasis on freedom of speech, as summarized by al-Hashimi in the following letter to one of the religious opponents he was attempting to convert through reason. Bring forward all the arguments you wish and say whatever you please and speak your mind freely. Now that you are safe and free to say whatever you please, appoint some arbitrator who will impartially judge between us and lean only towards the truth and be free from the empery of passion, and that arbitrator shall be reason, whereby God makes us responsible for our own rewards and punishments. Herein I have dealt justly with you and have given you full security and am ready to accept whatever decision reason may give for me or against me, for there is no compulsion in religion, and I have only invited you to accept our faith willingly and of your own accord, and have pointed out the hideousness of your present belief. Peace be with you and the blessings of God. Certain aspects of Renaissance humanism has its roots in the medieval Islamic world, including the art of dictation, called in Latin ars dictaminis, and the humanist attitude toward classical language.